The Aruch HaShulchan had asked the question. He says, I don't understand. On the one hand, the Shulchan Aruch says that there's a mitzvah to give either a 10th or a 20th or a 5th rather of your income. On the other hand, he says that there's a different share, which is to give according to the needs of the poor. He says, first of all, we have to recognize that these shiurim are midurabanan, of either 10% or 20%. And he quotes the obligation of the mitzvah of tzedakah, of being according to the needs of the poor. He says that's according to the Torah. Aval keshegolinu me'artzenu va'aniyim nisrabu va'ashirim nismoatu. He says, but when we were exiled from our land, and there was an increase in poor people, and there was a decrease in wealthy people, ve'imafilu yichalku ha'ashirim kol ma'osehem lo yaspiku lahashlim chol ha'aniyim de machsorim. He says that there still wouldn't be enough to satisfy the needs of all the poor. Lachein tiknu chachamim ma'aser v'chaymesh v'lo yoser the behechech laseis gevul. That's why our sages instituted 10 or 20% and not more, because there has to be a limit to how much you can give to the poor, because you're not obligated to impoverish yourself in order to support all the poor people. And as Rava has said in the Gemara in Tainis, Kuhu matzinu lebar meha lepasoach tiftach velomar kol ditzrich yesei veichol. He says we can fulfill all of the requirements except for this mitzvah of the Torah of open up your hands and give freely to the poor, and to say whoever needs, let him come and eat. Mishum dinafishi chayole dimachuza shahar be'aniyim yesham v'kol machlan mechalia karna. He says because there are so many weak people in the city of Machuza, because there's so many poor, and it's destroying people's principle, that, in other words, if we were to try and open our homes to everyone who is needy, we would end up destroying our own financial security. And basically, according to the way he's understanding it, this is the amount that a person is obligated to give. Im yado maseges kolomar shuhu ashir gadol va'aniyim sham shema'atim iten kefit zorech ha'aniyim. He says, if you're wealthy and there is a minimus of poor people, then give according to the needs of the poor. Afim mein bazelo chomesh v'lo meiser, even if it's less than 10% or 20%. Mipnei shezehu ikar hamitzvah shel tzedakah litein dei machzoro. Because the mitzvah of tzedakah is to provide for the poor according to their needs. Avalim eid yado maseges, but if you can't afford to take care of all of the poor people, klomar oshahu eno asher kolkach, that is to say you're not that wealthy, osha aniyim merubim, where there's an increase of the poor, yitain ad chomesh o meiser, then give the measurements of either 20 or 10%. Ba'av she'ein bazeh dei machzaro halo I efshir yoter. And even though you're not fulfilling the Torah's commandment of give the poor according to their needs, nonetheless, you can't do more. The nearer da'af mi she'enu notein meiser, b'kol makom mitzvahs hatzdaka kiyim ela shelo kiyim ha'karoi. And it's based on this, says the Aruch HaShulchan, that we have two separate mitzvahs, the mitzvah of tzedakah and the mitzvah of meiser, when you can't take care of the poor properly. Even therefore, according to this, if you don't give your 10% or 20%, you still have fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah, but you haven't done it in the optimal way. Because really, in other words, a person could say to himself, look, I can't afford to take care of the needs of all the poor in my community. I simply, there's too many poor people. And even if everyone got together and gave their fair share, I would not be able to, we would not be able to take care of it. I also have chosen not to give 10% of my income. So you've definitely fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah, but not in the optimal way. V'zehu kitruma shenosin pachos mechamishim shehimidas beinanis. And in that respect, We know that, for example, the Torah does not give a shear, an amount of how much truma you have to give to the Kohen. But the Mishnah says that, average people give 1/50th, generous people give 1/40th, and miserly people give 1/60th. So if a person were to choose to give 10%, less than 10%, he's not fulfilling Mida Beinanis anymore. And what I'm explaining sounds like what the Rambam says also. Shekosav mitzvahs aseh litain staka la'aniya Yisrael kafi masharoi la'ani. The Torah's prescription for tzedakah is to give to the poor person what is appropriate to the poor person. If the person who's giving tzedakah can afford it, and whatever the ani is lacking, you give him. But if the poor person asks for, he tells you, this is how much I need $100,000, and the donor can't afford that amount, then he should give according to his affordability. The kama ad chomesh mitzvah min amubchar ad kam l'shana. He says, and how much is that? Up until a fifth, and not more. Okay, so you see that the Rambam is also seems to be explaining it the way we're explaining it. There's a separate mitzvah of tzedakah to satisfy every ani according to your ability. And then there's a separate thing of when there's a preponderance of aniyim, which I guess you could argue would be the same situation today if we take into account Eretz Yisrael. In other words, if Eretz Yisrael counts as our obligation to support the poor, it's probably true today that there's too much poverty for us to afford to take care of them, unless you argue that if we were to take, I don't know, I'm not really sure how to make this calculation. We also don't know what we have to supply to the poor to make them whole. There, like we learned before, there are many people in Eretz Yisrael who feel that I'm poor if I can't afford to buy a dira for my kids when I marry them off. And that, so the whole, there's so much ambiguity in even what defines an ani, a poor person. And therefore, it's clear that we side with those poskim who say that there's absolutely no basis to the 10% from the Torah. Because the 10% from the Torah was instituted by the Chachamim, as I've explained. When there's too many aniyim, we say, listen, you can't impoverish yourself. Right. So we learned before that the donor has the zuchus to decide which ones he's going to support. And we did learn a bit of a hierarchical system as far as which tzedakos take priority. But we also pointed out that there's some problems with that system, that as far as that really at the end of the day, whatever speaks to the heart of the donor is what he has a right to donate to. And there are those who try to bring proof that Meiser Ksofim is from the Torah, that's the Taz. Utamihani, and to me that doesn't make any sense. Adarabba Raya Mikan Lahefech. If anything, the Taz's sources just really indicate the opposite. The Ikar Chiyav Bitzdaka min HaTorah Ulitin Lo De Machsoro. He says the main mitzvah of tzedakah is to give the poor person whatever he is lacking. Okay. Umaiser v'choymesh takanta derabananu. And the whole idea of 10% and 20% is rabbinic. Hechu asar rabbanon v'tiknu shelo yiten yoter mechomesh after lo yaspik l'dei machzora. He says, and if you'll ask, how could the Chachamim limit the Torah's mandate to give a poor person whatever he needs? In other words, how could the Chachamim, if the Torah says give the poor person what he needs, what is sufficient for his needs, and that exceeds 10% and 20%, how could the Chachamim scale it back? How do they have the right to tell a person not to give what the Torah says to give? Halo kasha. He says that's not a problem. He says, besides what I wrote previously, that the whole idea is that a person is not supposed to impoverish himself for the sake of this mitzvah. He says there's also a Torah basis for a person that prohibits a person from giving away all his money to tzedakah. Kiditnan be'erchin macharim adam matzanu umevakro v'mhechrim es kulam eno muchrana minahani mili. If a person were to dedicate all of his assets to the temple, that declaration is null and void. And how do we know this? The Tana Rabbanan mikol asher lo v'lo kol asher lo. Torah says by the law of dedicating things to the temple that it is mi kol asher lo, from all of your assets, but not all of your assets, ayin sham. So it's even derived from the Torah that you're not allowed to just irresponsibly give away all of your assets. The Taz seems to say that there's a basis in the Torah for 10 and 20% for tzedakah. We saw that the Birkei Yosef might hold like him as well. V'chein kasav harambam sefer Hilchos erechin la'olam lo yakdish adam kol nechasav. That a person is not allowed to sanctify all of his assets. V'ha'osa kain over al das hakasav. And anyone who does so violates Scripture's wishes. Shaharehu omer mikol asher lo v'lo kol asher lo. He says, and he quotes the same pasuk as the Gemara. And the Rambam writes, "Ve'enzu chasidus elashtus." This is not piety; it's foolishness. Ela kol hamifazer mamonu b'mitzvos al yafazer yoter mechomesh. And therefore, we have this general principle that if you're going to spend money on doing a mitzvah, don't spend more than 20% of your assets. Ad kan l'shona. Harei mefurish demin haTorah asur l'chale kol nechasav. He says, you see very clearly that there's even a din midioraisa, that you're not allowed to give away all of your money. And therefore you have to give according to a restricted measure. And that's why the Chachamim gave us these measurements that have a basis in the Torah of 10% and 20%. Mishum de mitzvua haya ma'aser rishon va'od ma'aser echad o ma'aser ani o ma'aser sheni o ma'aser ani. And the basis for this 20% is because a farmer would have to give away 20% of his field, either on a regular the first, second, fourth, and fifth year of the Shemitah cycle. He would give ma'aser rishon away to the Levi, and then give a second 10% that he had to take up to Yerushalayim, so that's 20%. Or in a third and sixth year of the Shemitah cycle, he'd give away 10% to the Levi and another 10% to the Ani. The Tikkun Rabbanan came to Oraisa Tikkun, came near a Libar. He says, and the rabbis used the pasuk to sort of create that buffer of 10 and 20% based on Yaakov's statement, everything that you give me, aser asranulach, I will give meiser, which they said is maximum 20%. He says, this seems to be so obvious to me that's the basis for 10 and 20%. And therefore, if a person still gives tzedakah, but he gives less than 10%, he hasn't satisfied the rabbinic requirement, but he still fulfilled unquestionably the mitzvah of tzedakah. He says, however, When it comes to the mitzvah pidyon shavuyim, it seems to me that you are allowed to spend more than 20% of your income. And similarly, if people are literally starving, then you would be allowed to give more. If you're actually saving a life. In other words, a mitzvah that actually mamish saves a life. Not just because it says so on the ad that, Rav Chaim Kanievsky said it's pikuach nefesh, right? We're not talking about that, where there's this overly dramatic advertising for tzedakah. But if you actually know of the case personally, where if we don't raise X amount of money for this person, they're going to die, right? So then you are allowed to give even more than 20% in that particular case. And under certain conditions, you'd be obligated. Well, for pikuach nefesh, you have to give up all of your assets for pikuach nefesh. But the question is, which he doesn't really address, is what do you do if it's not your sole responsibility? Let's say there's like 1,000 people in our community, and there's one person who needs to raise a huge amount of money to save his life, right? It doesn't fall everything on one person. You do the best that you can, but there's a greater sense of urgency when it's literally pikuach nefesh. I mean, I'm just imagining, like, what's if, God forbid, there's someone who needs a very expensive surgery, it's not covered by OHIB, but this will actually save the person's life. So it could be in that situation that the community might have a halachic obligation to spend even more. But it's not clear to me. In other words, it's a very rare situation to have like that, because usually we do have very philanthropic people, who can help with that. Yeah, that would be considered pikuach nefesh if there's kidnappings going on. Okay, so I think that sort of exhausts it, and we can go back to the text that we were, in Hilchos tzedakah. Okay. And the truth is, I like the way the Aruch HaShulchan presents it, because he's basically saying that the idea of 10 or 20% is rabbinic in nature, and it almost is. I think it really helps us to understand this. Really, the shaila hayim yesh chiyuv laseis meiser ksafim, and the answer is that, well, the Aruch HaShulchan is a little bit more machmir than the way we've seen it brought down by other poskim. Some of the poskim actually say that there is absolutely no basis for the 10 or 20%. And it could be that they were talking about situations where if a person were to give even 10%, he would be actually depriving himself of basic essentials, because some people were just squeaking by, And it's certainly conceivable that in today's world, if after a person is assessed all of his tuition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there's really no money, and after the mortgages and all of the other expenses, there's no money left. But, obviously there are going to be some people who say, well, summer camp and then, vacation for the family in the winter, right? I don't think that those count, right? But that's also very subjective, right? There's this tzedakah that's being promoted, help a family go on vacation in the summer to the cottage, right? And so I think it's nice, but okay. So we've seen all of this text. Yeah. early Achron. Siman Hey. Be'inyan im meiser ksafim hu la'aniyim dafka. So the mandate of giving 10% of tithing, 10 or 20%, must that go exclusively to the poor? Or can one count that as far as, let's say, all of the mitzvahs that he does for others that cost money can be taken out of that 10%? So the she'elah is as follows. Ha'im chayev latet ma'aser ksafim la'aniyim dafka, o dilma rashai latet lishar mitzvahs kagon lebeis hakneses or lesefer Torah. Right? Your shul membership or a donation to the shul or to purchase the sefer Torah, can that also come out of your meiser? So the tshuva is, lefi rov haposkim, sarich latet ma'aser ksafim la'aniyim dafka, v'chein nachon linhog lechatchila. According to the majority of poskim, a person should dafka give his tithe specifically to the poor, and anything else that you spend that's not dafka for the poor, let's say shul membership or writing a sefer Torah, or I don't know. It is a doraisa, but the question is, how do you fulfill it, right? So, for some people, some poskim say that you can fulfill it as long as you participate financially in even a portion of the writing, which is why people buy letters, right? Right. But obviously, that's not the optimal way. It is the 613th mitzvah, the mitzvah of writing a sefer Torah. So therefore, lechatchila, if you have the wherewithal to give 10% to the poor, and then additional monies would go to your shul and to, let's say, helping a couple facing infertility, which is also a worthy tzedakah, and all of those other charities that exist in the community, let's say Chai Lifeline, that's a wonderful charity, but it's not going to the poor, right? In other words, we have to be, in most cases, it's not going to the poor, right? So see, first of all, how long this is. So we'll do the biurim. I just want to see if there's any additional text. Right? No, there's no additional text. Everything is in the biurim, right? So let's just clarify this idea. He says, "Techila yesh lahakdim shebeshut chsam sofer kasav shelafi chelek ma'arishonim im noten l'shar mitzvot v'lo la'aniyim ein mitkayemet mitzvah shel meiser ksafim." So he says, first of all, the chsam sofer. He writes that there's a portion of Rishonim who say that if I give my 10% for other mitzvahs and not exclusively for the poor, I haven't fulfilled properly the mitzvah of Meiser Ksafim. V'sheyesh cholkim al zeh. And there are some who disagree. V'zeh l'shana. And he writes as follows. The Sfira leila maharil dechiyav hafrashas Meiser Ksafim hu mamish deoraisa ula aniyim. That the maharil holds that Meiser Ksafim, which is like the Taz, that Meiser Ksafim is a biblical law, and it has to dafka go to the poor, which puts the Maharil in the minority. Amnam hacholkim, demaisi hashach seviri lahu, Meiser Ksafim eno domer lemeiser gorin shuhu doraisa mamish, the tovel hatavua. He says there are many people who disagree, including the Shach who quotes a whole series of people. And they hold that Meiser Ksafim is not at all in the realm of taking Meiser from your agriculture, from your grain, from your produce. He says because that actually alleviates your other 90% and makes it permissible for you. Masha'en kein Meiser Ksafim midrash asifri me'aser ta'aser. Ikan shemafrishim la'amele Torah meiser, v'lav dafka la'amele Torah, and l'dvar mitzvah sheyirtza lefi nidro shel hamafrish ad kan l'shana. Says that, and this is all part of the Chassam Sofer's tshuva. He says that meiser ksafim can go to based on the Sifri's citation of the pasuk of Aser to Aser, right? That from here you learn that you're supposed to donate a tithe to people who are studying Torah, and not just those who are studying Torah, but for any mitzvah that you wish to fulfill with your money, you can take out of that tithe. So the Chassam Sofer clearly states that there's two sides here. He says, "Uvehemshech devarav dan Chassam Sofer legabe mishameis vehiniach sfarim shekasuv aleim sheim mekasbei meiser shel krova." He says the Chassam Sofer has the following shaila, and we actually did deal with this issue. There is such a concept of using your tzedakah money to buy sfarim. That there is a shita that says that you can use your a portion of your 10%, purchase sfarim, and create a lending library. A lending library that anyone who wants to come and borrow can borrow the sfarim, and that's the mitzvah that you do with your meiser. Okay, so the Chassam Sofer deals with the following shaila: a guy passed away, and he left for his heirs a small library of sfarim that were purchased with his meiser money. So, shehem mikasbi meiser shel krovim shetziva lo liknos sfarim lahashilam laacherim lav dafka aniyim. And he says to his heirs, he says, I want you to continue purchasing sfarim and lend them out to people. And these people are not dafka aniyim. They could be anyone in the neighborhood. V'apotropsim al yisoma of aniyim tonim shemikiven shenasa kan shima shelo kedin v'kaspei meiser sharei lo niknu bahem davar miyuchad la'aniyim l'chein hem rotzim l'mochim l'parnasas ha'yisomim ha'aniyim. And the custodians of the estate, people who are in charge of distributing the money to the orphans, I guess the orphans are too young to take care of it on their own, so the trustees of the estate are claiming, hey, this guy used meiser money illegitimately because he didn't give his meiser money to the poor davka. So they want to liquidate those sfarim, they want to sell them and give the proceeds to the heirs. So the Chassam Sofer was asked this question, and he says, Hisik v'zel l'shona, dilamaharil u'lepashtus mashmos ha'shulchan aruch lav kol kiminayu dehakrovim lomar sheikach sfarim mehamaiser. He says, according to the Maharil and to the simple import of the Shulchan Aruch, where Meiser is supposed to be given to the poor Dafka, then the relatives the relatives are the ones who are saying, use the Meiser that our father left over and use it to purchase more Sfarim. They do not have the right to tell him to do that. But according to the other poskim, the krovim, the relatives, do have a right to say that they should be that either liquidate the svarim or whatever money was left over from Meiser should be used to purchase Meiser, svarim, according to the wish of the decedent. So we'll hold it here for today, and Mirz Hashem will continue tomorrow. Okay, have a great day, everybody. Tomorrow, which is Friday, right? That'll be our last day for learning for a week, because I'm going away next week. I'll be gone all week next week.